First of all, I'll explain what the program is. We've been running about a year, having had a soft rollout for training purposes back in January 2020. In February 2020, we started taking incident reports from the volunteer monitors, sort of on-the-job training, so we could talk with them about what was worth bothering with and what wasn't, and how to handle certain situations. And we started out slowly because we didn't want to be perceived as the band cops. We needed the vast majority of amateurs to buy into the program, because no enforcement program works without that, no matter how many people we have doing it, even if it's FCC people. So now we're starting to ratchet down. The program was actually the FCC's idea, suggested in a meeting back in 2007. And it was their 17. It was their suggestion that we develop a program with more teeth than the official observer program had. Now the OO program worked very well over the years, but the FCC said they wanted to work with the ARRL on a joint program with a little more teeth, since they had suffered budget and staff cuts over a long period. And they promised expedited action on cases we referred to them after gathering evidence, and in cases where we got no cooperation. And the purpose was to preserve the integrity of the bands and to be an adjunct or a force multiplier for FCC enforcement. And they also suggested certain areas of the country where they could use some beefed up groups of volunteer monitors, and we were able to do that in most areas. These were areas where they had been thinned out, especially bad because of budget cuts. The FCC wanted enhanced training, and they wanted the ARRL to vet the applicants. And the FCC promised to participate in regular training. That was mandatory in our agreement, and they have kept that agreement. In fact, we have a training session next month, and the FCC is going to participate in that. The application period was open in May of 2019, and it ran until July. We encouraged official observers to apply, and a lot of them did. A lot of them didn't, because they were just tired of being an OO, and it took a lot of time to do that. And we didn't have a lot of requirements, just that you be licensed for a period of at least 3 years, have no enforcement history, of course, and that you have a reasonably good state-of-the-art station. We didn't require that you be any certain license class. And we were looking for a balanced outlook about amateur radio and what the service was supposed to be. And we didn't want people hell-bent on cleaning up the bands, because there's an old saying that if someone really wants to be a police officer, probably they shouldn't. So we wanted somebody to take a balanced outlook. And we actually went through the applications in order the date received, and they were all good, actually. Some applicants were broadcast engineers, software designers, and SD engineers, and a lot of them just regular ham operators. As I said, they had to be licensed for 3 years, and we got about 200 applications, and we did telephone interviews with every one of them in the summer of 2019. The FCC had suggested that about 165 to 175 will be a manageable number, which we agreed with, but we stopped at that number and invited the rest to be in a reserve pool to be drawn upon as we needed them, as volunteer monitors rotated out of the program, or if we had special projects that took a group or a cluster of volunteer monitors. And so, as it's turned out, we've had almost no turnover. We've had one death because of COVID, and we've had some family health issues that required some of the volunteer monitors to be sidelined. But nobody has resigned. We've had a very stable pool here. And I would go into other background on the program, but I don't want to bore you with that. And you can get that from the league's website if you go in the upper right-hand corner and search Volunteer Monitor Program. Now, what we did last period, as I said, we were ratcheting down. We had issued about 10 or 15 advisory notices the whole year last year, but just in February alone, we issued 10 advisory notices. And the advisory notice is an attempt to resolve rule violations informally before requesting FCC intervention. So we had operators in Oklahoma, Michigan, Florida, and New York received advisories concerning operation outside their license class. Operators in California, Georgia received advisories concerning interference to repeater systems and to HF net operations. An operator in Arizona received an advisory regarding failure to ID, and an operator in Charlottesville, Virginia received an advisory concerning improper bandwidth. We sent an advisory warning letter to a desert racing association in Odessa, Texas, because for two big events last spring, they used amateur radio repeater frequencies. And we think that some dealer probably just short-circuited the process and set them up that way. But we're not sure who the dealer was, and they don't even seem to know who the dealer was. So we've been dealing with them. We finally warned them no more use of amateur 2-meter frequencies for racing events. And we also sent that warning letter to 15 two-way radio business dealers in Texas. So we're hoping that'll cure the problem. We had 2 meetings with the FCC, and we had 1 referral from the FCC. Now we feel like this is the year to ratchet down because most people are familiar with the program now, and it's clear that we're not the band police. We're just trying to preserve amateur radio and fill in some gaps that the FCC's had to undergo because of staff shortages and budget cuts and so forth. They've lost half of their field engineers over the last 8 or 10 years. A lot of good people stayed at the FCC, but a lot of good people left too, and their jobs were eliminated or they took other jobs as they saw the cutbacks coming. Now, what the program is not is very important. We can't babysit the bands, and we especially can't manage repeaters. And I wish we could, but there are a gazillion repeaters in the country. Lots of them are linked up. And the first person responsible for proper operation on a repeater is the licensee, because setting up a repeater is a voluntary action and it has to be controlled just as any licensee's base station has to be. Now we'll work with the repeater licensee, and if the violations can't be stopped after the licensee requests the user to stay off, if they know who it is, then we'll work with the FCC in getting a violation notice or stay off order right from the FCC. Which we'll have 1 case like that tomorrow. Now, we also encourage the repeater groups to utilize the local courts in areas where they have harassment by communication statutes. For example, in Tennessee, 1 repeater was having a particularly hard time with 1 user and couldn't get him to stay off. He was harassing the users and so forth. They went to a local court and got an injunction. And an hour later, the person violated the injunction. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Just an hour later. And so they called him back into court, and he got a 30-day sentence. And it went all the way to the Court of Appeals, and he was just gleeful, didn't care about it. He was cavalier about it, I should say, because he just assumed that the Court of Appeals would say this is a federal matter, it's an FCC matter, and we won't get into it. But that's not quite what the Tennessee Court of Appeals said. The Tennessee Court of Appeals agreed with the idea that it didn't matter that it was federal. The fact is, he violated injunction by a local judge. That was the violation. So they upheld the 30 days. And 30 days in jail is a remarkable attitude adjustment tool to somebody who operates on a repeater. It just does wonders. So our job is to audit the bands and try to obtain cooperative action on the part of violators. And if we can't get it, we work with the victims to get a quick determination on what to do next. And as I said, we work very closely with the FCC because the FCC expects referrals from us. And they expect to get involved if there's no cooperation from a licensee on our part. And I would say that the FCC also refers cases to us to gather additional evidence from time to time. We can ask the FCC to hold up renewals for review. We can ask them to hold up upgrades, and we can ask the FCC to institute a proceeding to remove voice privileges remove voice privileges from a license. And of course, we can ask for a revocation proceeding. Now, we're not going to try to resolve what are essentially selfish disputes. There was a well-known ARRL president said once that most of the problems on the amateur bands can easily be resolved if one person will just move a few kilohertz. And after all, we have thousands of frequencies, and we all took exams to operate this stuff, and we presumably know how to do it. We have thousands of dollars worth of radio equipment. So we can't get into those types of disputes. There would be no end to them. We're a cross-section of society, and that's always been a good thing. The bad news is we're a cross-section of today's society. So the sad thing is that we're rude and selfish, quick to take offense or get in an argument over a parking spot when there's 150 available. And we give nobody the benefit of the doubt. And it seems like everybody these days focuses on rights with no thought of responsibilities. And to the extent we have problems in amateur radio, that's the reason. And we owe it to amateur radio to pass it on in at least as good a shape as we got it when we got into it. And the problems on the bands are not from no coders, but you'll hear long-term licensees whine about that, when in fact they themselves haven't worked a CW contact in decades. The problems on the bands are from long-time licensees who think they know everything. Now, it's a little bit different with repeaters and your repeater harassment because of the wide availability of cheap radios that operate on 2 meters. So your situation is a little bit different up there. But on the HF bands, the problems are usually from long-time licensees who think they know everything, and they use a kilowatt night after night to talk to the same people across a state or across a region. And they haven't tried anything else. They've never even tried 17 meters, and they criticize new licensees. But unlike previous times in our history, they don't want to go out of their way to help them. And they don't realize what Edward R. Murrow said: just because your voice can be heard around the world doesn't mean you're wiser than when it can only be heard at the end of the bar. And that right there sums up a lot of the problems on HF. 80% of all interference is unintentional. We know that from even at the FCC. I can't tell you the number of times I had recordings of an argument on 75 meters as to who was causing interference and why they were doing it. And we knew for a fact that the interference was coming from an errant broadcast station in South America, or a defective wave machine in the Gulf of Mexico that MIT ran, or a defective magnetic resonant imaging machine in Indiana that got on 20 meters, just things like that. One thing we can't do, and I think you'll agree with this, I had a hard time realizing this, but no matter what type of rules you have or what type of enforcement program you have, you can't regulate stupid. There's just no way to do it. It's impossible to do it. Now, we have to be vigilant, because in technology, the norm is for things to change right out from under us, and we can't take anything for granted. I mean, I'm sure nobody in this meeting expected Sears to ever go bankrupt, or that the landline would be obsolete, or that you could, years ago, that you could view a product on a screen and have it delivered to you the next day. So in technology, things especially can change out from under us, and we have to realize that and operate with that appreciation of amateur radio. And we just can't take it for granted. We can't take it for granted that we have thousands of frequencies and all kinds of privileges. And it may be that we have lots of our frequencies because they are inherently unstable, or that nobody has thought of a better use for them yet. But you remember the days when people laughed at the idea of using frequencies above 900 megahertz, and you see what we have there. So I've often been asked, what would FT8 destroy amateur radio, or would the internet or texting or WhatsApp or whatever? The only thing that I can see that would destroy amateur radio is the microphone, by people who don't have any appreciation or gratefulness for it. And I've tried to tell these people, and keep in mind, I deal with a fraction of a percent. That's who I fret over. But my job is to keep that to a fraction of a percent and not let it get any more. But I tell these people, we don't have any frequency rights. If you go look at your license right now, you won't see rights. What you'll see is privileges. And we can't let our own conduct destroy amateur radio. And we especially cannot be hesitant or nervous about demonstrating amateur radio to young people because of what we might tune across on 75 meters or 40 meters. And you know, you have to do a lot of this. Maybe there's a group that's acting very irresponsible, or it would be an embarrassment if you happen to hear them to somebody if you're demonstrating amateur radio. You have to shun them and just get away from them and cut them loose. You may lose some friends over it. I have. There are a couple of nets on 75 meters I used to like checking into, but they got a little bit too raw and just wasn't something that I felt like advertised amateur radio in a good manner. And I certainly wouldn't want anybody listening to it if I was trying to demonstrate amateur radio to a young person. So I cut them loose and got away from it. And you tell them why, don't argue with them, just tell them why and cut them loose. I live in Pennsylvania, so the Amish have one solution for things like that. It's called shunning. Just cut them loose and don't deal with them. And we have to take the high road in these situations because we can never go back to the period in the late 80s and 90s when there were too many segments of amateur radio that were sounding as bad as CB ever did in the 60s and 70s. We can't go back to that period because we won't survive it. In today's technology, we just will not resolve it because anything can become obsolete right out from under us. One thing we have to think about is this. You know, we have a very good relationship with the power industry. The ARRL works closely with the power industry to resolve radio frequency interference cases. And in fact, there's an IEEE committee that's been meeting now. It's winding up after about 3 years of very successful and productive meetings to develop an IEEE standard for the power line industry to use in resolving RFI problems. Several big power companies are on this committee, and it's been my privilege to work with the committee and with those power companies. They're very cooperative, and it's going to be just amazing to have a specific IEEE standard that those companies would use to resolve RFI problems. But here's the situation. The lab at ARRL says that in the next few years, interference from solar power devices and solar fields will far outnumber power line interference cases. It's the wave of the future, as you know. And what you probably haven't thought about is that we don't have the same clout with the solar power industry that we do with the power line industry. Now, the league works closely with the solar industry, and they have a great relationship with some of the major players, such as Tesla. And they do a wonderful job to resolve interference problems. Tesla especially will send somebody out in a heartbeat to resolve a problem. But the industry as a whole is too new for us. They generally don't know us, and they don't know of amateur radio. And I don't want them judging us by what they might hear late at night on 75 meters. The solar industry is a wave of the future, and they know that, and they don't know us. They don't have an appreciation for amateur radio. That's what wakes me up at 3 in the morning. Now, amateur radio, I'm sure I speak for all of you when I say that amateur radio joyfully occupies our lives, and probably all of us remember when we saw the first amateur station. And I certainly do. It was a Collins AM station in South Carolina, and it made a permanent impression on me. And I remember my first contact as if it were yesterday. And the people that taught me the code and helped me with the exams, several of them are still alive. They're in their 90s, but they're still alive. In fact, I'll see one in a few weeks, 97 years old. He taught me the code and gave me my first exam. And although he's 97, until about 6 months ago, for 10 years prior to 6 months ago, we had a 40-meter schedule every Thursday morning at 10 o'clock on CW. He took a bad fall about 6 months ago, and he can't go downstairs to the radio shack. But when I go down there shortly, I'm going to make sure that he has part of his equipment set up upstairs where he's confined right now. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to understand our legacy and our gift, and we've got to pay it forward and tolerate nothing less from our peers. And if you can do that, then maybe amateur radio can last 100 years. I used to say 1,000 years, but at the rate we're going, I don't think even the planet will be here in 1,000 years. So I'd be satisfied with amateur radio lasting 100 years. And it's our job to pass it on. This is our watch, and it's our job to pass it on in at least as good a shape as we received it. So that's my sermon. I'll take any questions you have.
Okay, we have
Riley?
a raised hand from Ken.
Okay.
Ken, WB2KWC.
Okay, thank you, Riley. You seem to have indicated that a majority of the offenders are longtime licensed hams rather than unlicensed intruders. I'm wondering, has this changed any over the years? Have you observed any, the ratio increasing or decreasing?
No, I haven't. And of course, I speak mostly for HF. Now, of course, you folks that are heavily into repeaters have a different situation with intruders who come across these very cheap handhelds. And a lot of them don't know what they are, or they get on deliberately just to harass you. But on the HF bands, that situation hasn't changed. And it's like I say, it's a fraction of a percent, but my job is to make it so that it stays a fraction of a percent. And I've never understood why somebody would risk a fine of $4,000 or $5,000 or risk losing their license when this is a hobby and they have thousands of dollars worth of radio equipment. You can't understand somebody like that. If you did understand them, you'd probably be as much of a fruitcake as they are.
Riley?
Julia has her hand up. Julia? Richie, I'll do.
No, I think I am unmuted at the moment.
Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
Okay, sorry. In terms of the number of violators and things that you've noticed, does there seem to be a correlation to things like the solar cycle? Like as we come now into cycle 25, do you anticipate that will go up just because people will have the ability really to be more worldwide about their violations?
Yeah, I guess it's like the highway system. The more people you have driving on it, the more violations you're going to have just by logic. But you'll go through periods when the bands aren't that good, and you won't get an awful lot of complaints. But of course, when things are opening up like they're beginning to, we'll get more complaints. But that's part of the process there. People they get on, they hear more, they're more active, and they can hear stations in areas they couldn't hear before. And of course, propagation, for example, on 40 meters can change in a few minutes. But the better the bands are, the more activity there is to that could go wrong or could be complained about.
So scaling back maybe these observers that you are talking about, that you've just implemented and all, is it really a good idea to scale them back at this point as we start to ramp up?
We're not scaling them back. We're keeping the number the same. We've had almost no, well, I guess we've had one person leave the program, but we have a good number of volunteer monitors, and we're happy with that number. And as the bands open up, they seem to be doing, it was really good on 20 meters today. We've got enough to handle that, I think. But of course, the complaints will go up as the bands get better. But we can handle, I believe.
Thank you.
Now, if you picked up something about scaling back, that probably was from a comment about the FCC. They have, as all agencies have, they've lost employees and budget money regularly for 10 years. And we're starting to feel the effects of that in numerous agencies, but especially the FCC. Now, they have had to scale back because of budget issues. Plus, when you think of all the things that the FCC has to handle now, as opposed to 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was basically all RF, but now it's the internet. It's the telephone companies and the payments into the fund that they're supposed to pay to get coverage into sparse areas and remote areas and so forth. There's fraud in that universal service fund, is what I'm trying to say. In fact, I talked to a fellow at the FCC last year who said that he had $7 million worth of universal service fraud cases on his desk right at that time. There's just all kinds of issues. And to get an idea of what the FCC does, if you would go to the fcc.gov and just scan once in a while the Daily Digest. You can even get on the list to receive it, but it's going to be a lot of stuff. But you will see some things on there that are 8 and 10 actions that the FCC took or had to get involved in, and none of which related to RF. So whereas RF used to be 80% of what they dealt with, now the FCC has all kinds of things to deal with. And why they had to scale down the FCC, I'll never understand. And I think that'll turn out to be a big mistake sometime here in the near future.
Rich, you had a question?
Yeah, so Riley, it used to be that if we had a problem, we knew who the OOs were, and we would let them know, and then they would take whatever steps they were going to take. So what's the procedure now if someone, or even us as a club, recognizes that there's a problem? What is the reporting procedure?
Okay, on the league website, if you look under Volunteer Monitor on the news site there, it'll give you that process. You can file a complaint either with me or just to the league headquarters, and they'll get it to the Volunteer Monitor program. The volunteer monitors are mostly anonymous. We identify them only by number. And the reason for that is the official observers were getting a lot of grief in the last decade of the program. You know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, if somebody got an OO notice, they would be grateful. And they'd say, man, I'm glad I got this from the league rather than from the FCC. But in today's society and in the society that the OOs were dealing with, as soon as somebody would get a notice, they want to sue somebody, or they're thinking, what right do you have to send me a notice? Or, of course, I didn't do that. And they go off, you know, without thinking. And the FCC, the official observers just got tired of it. And they would go to Hamfest and they would get some abuse or some static from these people. And so the FCC strongly suggested that we keep the identity of the volunteer monitors just by number as far as sending notices out, so that they won't have to put up with that flack. So back to your main point, you go to the league website and look for volunteer monitor complaints or enforcement. Anything like that will get you to my email address or the volunteer monitor program, and it'll get to me, and I'll farm it out to the volunteer monitors. Some of them, if they're around here, I work on them myself or work with the volunteer monitor on them. I sympathize with repeater operations, especially in your area, in a very crowded urban environment like that. You must have a lot of problems, and it must be just impossible to run them all down.
We definitely have had problems. We have a system that was developed by one of our technical gurus. We call it Green Sky, and it's a series of inputs throughout the metropolitan area. And with a certain degree of accuracy, they light up within a range of where the input station is coming from. And it's been very helpful.
Good.
But obviously the repeater and low power, somebody can be anywhere and causing interference and be very difficult to track down. We did many, many bunny hunts, but then we found sometimes in this area, the reflections off buildings just drove us crazy. But we've tried them. Yes, we've had a lot of problems, as have other repeaters in the area. Seems to be much better now, though.
Good.
Maybe Prozac is a little less money and people are calming down a little bit.
Yeah, the price of Prozac come down since they don't have a patent, and that might be more true than you think. But
I think, right?
technology will help some of that too. There are ways to lock people out of repeaters like the DMR systems and things like that. That helps. But the thing that worries me is the wide area linked repeaters, because that's a wonderful tool and it's very convenient, but to that extent, it's also vulnerable because there's so many ways to interfere with it. But given the number of repeaters we have, the overall level of repeater problems is minuscule. But when you get one, it really tears you up, and I understand that.
Bob, you had a question, W2OSR?
Yeah, something I want to mention. I don't know if it's anything that would the group would get involved with or not. I was listening on 20 meters this morning in the CW portion of the band, and I heard a single sideband signal. It sounded like two gentlemen speaking in Arabic. So I don't know if that comes under your bailiwick or not.
I've never heard that. The CW portions of the bands are wonderful. We never have any problems down here. So that's a little
As I
odd.
said, I don't know if it was somebody who had privileges for voice in that area
Yeah,
from whatever country they were in or not.
yeah, it could have been a mistake too. I don't know, but I'll certainly look out for complaints like that. I may get some tomorrow.
Okay.
When were you hearing that?
It was this morning, let's see. It would have been probably around between 9 and 10 in the morning.
Okay. I'll be interested to see where that goes if we get any more complaints. Hopefully that's an aberration.
Yeah, I hope so.
Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, very good. Hi, Riley. I'm Jim Easy. I'm the section manager for the NLI section, and I'd like to thank you so much for all you've been doing for the ARRL and the amateur radios and in our hobby. It's been great. You put a lot of effort into it, I know. What I'd like to also say is that the volunteer monitor program, which I was involved with, and I sent a lot of information out to my membership that when they wanted, when you were soliciting for them, I think it really turned out to be a great program. I was a little concerned about, I didn't know who the volunteer monitors were, and I understand what that reason, and it's not a big deal for me. But I do want to say, I know I had an issue out in Suffolk County, and I know you took care of that, or we still once in a while we have an issue, but basically you took care of that with a letter and a cease to sort of like stop doing his interference and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But a couple of things I wanted to ask is, one thing anyway, do you get involved with any of the D-Star stuff or digital stuff where we have unlicensed operator or somebody steals somebody else's license who was a silent key or got out of the hobby a long time and now they're working around? Or do you have any way to get to register the register guy, or not necessarily I have a D-Star stack myself that I'm in charge of, and I know I do have one or two people that get into a reflector group and they're not licensed. And I kind of have an idea who it is, but I can't prove it. We are working with Green Sky on it to try to pinpoint the best we can. But as you know, it comes through reflectors, could come anywhere throughout the country. Is there, do you have a connection with Regist, REGIST, where they, I don't think they check to see if this guy was actually licensed, but if you go check the license, it's unlicensed or it's been dead. Do you have a way in doing that?
I haven't had a case like that. I've had similar cases with WinLink where they picked up somebody that was unlicensed and they block them from the system. But I haven't had any situation yet with DMR, but we would try a similar thing. But let me back up on something you said. I'm glad you brought it up. We had good intentions, but we stumbled here in this whole volunteer monitor process. Our intention was, and we stated on the notice for applications that volunteer monitors should send their application to their section manager,
Right.
or list on their application that they had talked to the section manager. And almost nobody did that. And I think a lot of them just didn't bother with it, or missed it, or didn't know who the section manager was. And so our intention was for you folks to be totally involved with it. But then we started thinking, how much more can section managers be involved with? I mean, you folks burn the wheels off the cars. You do all the work and all the travel. And so somebody suggested, well, maybe it's a good idea that they don't know what's going on, because they can go to a ham fest and they don't have to take any grief about complaints and so forth. They can say, you'll have to go to the volunteer monitor program. So
Well,
we
what
just left
happened-
it that way.
No, I agree with you, but I really don't recall ever seeing that. But in retrospect, I'll go back and say, I've asked people if they have a problem, come to me with it, see if I can resolve it locally before I send it up to you.
Mhm.
And that we've been trying to do that, and that's what I'm trying to do with this D-Star thing. It wasn't DMR, it was D-Star. And we're trying to do that now, but I thought maybe you had a way to do that. I do know a couple of the Long Island VMs. Well, not really. I can't say I do, but I do and I don't. So let's put it that way. And, you know, I actually will reach out to one and he'll tell me, or I'll reach out to you. I'll send something up to you if I have to. And I encourage my membership to send it to me, and I'll send it north at Newington, or I'll tell them to send it to you directly.
Yeah, you can come to me directly. And
Right.
of the open cases I have now, I guess we have about 100 or so open cases. None of them involve DMR, anything like that. So, but I'd be willing to work with you or anybody else on developing a way of finding out, locking out people, whatever you have to do to find out who's doing it. Even if you don't know for sure, a lot of times, you know, 51% of enforcement is showing up and asking what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
So we'd certainly work with you on that, but I don't have a single case involving DMR right
All right. Well, it's a D-Star issue,
now.
D-Star.
Or D-Star, what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
And there's actually two persons on that, and I'm still monitoring it. And if I get some better information, recording or whatever, I'll
Okay.
get it up to you. But being, you know, being there on reflectors, I could be talking a lot of different places. All in all, you've been doing a great job, and thank you so much for what you've
I
done.
appreciate that very much. Thank you.
The ARRL and everybody. Thank you so much for this talk. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Jim.
Steve, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Riley, DEKA2YHY. Steve, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Several times I heard you mention these inexpensive or cheap radios that are out there. We all know what they are, where they come from, and they are enticing as all heck. I would venture to say that quite a number of people on this Zoom session probably own them. You know, it's both a boon and a bane. I think it's a boon because it gives a lot of new hams a very inexpensive way to get into the hobby, and some of them are a bane because they're not quite transmitting per the rules. But my question is this: are these radios, and in particular the one that was written up in the ARRL magazine a few months ago, are they legal to use for licensed hams?
Well, first of all, let me back up a little bit. The Bofangs and other cheap radios that meet the commission standards are okay. The commission issued a warning to Bofang here a while back that they had to stop marketing certain versions of those radios because they did not meet the standards, and they mentioned in there a fine of so many thousands of dollars a day if they didn't stop doing it. Now, what you touched on is a little bit sensitive right now, because the theory and our operating mode has always been that you don't have to use type accepted, as it was called, or certified equipment in the amateur service. Now, in a meeting that was held with the FCC some time ago, the person running that meeting had a different idea of that. And they said, no, that's not true. It has to be approved. And that dispute still, I don't know if the league has picked up on resolving that. The league knows about it, and I'm not sure exactly how they're going to resolve it. But in my opinion, and our operating method has been that we don't have to use FCC approved equipment, because after all, we're supposed to do homebrew equipment and modify and change and take different equipment and convert it to amateur use and so forth. Of course, it's a little bit different with marketing linear amplifiers, but I don't know whether the league has resolved that or what they plan to do, but it's kind of a dead issue now, because they said one thing and we say another, but it's not on the front burner, and there's been nothing contested about it yet. It's more or less dead in the water as far as I can tell.
Well, I tell you, I take that to be a yes, that you can use them as a licensed operator, as long as you, as the control and licensed operator, make sure that that thing is doing what it's supposed to do within the rules. It's the licensee's responsibility.
That's my approach, and that's what I have understood is the approach in amateur service for 40 years.
Very good. Thank you very much. And again, great presentation.
Thank you.
Bird, you're up.
Yes, hi Riley.
Hi.
I'm a new ham. I got my technician ticket just this January.
No, congratulations.
And I want to let you know that I'm really enjoying the hobby.
Good. Good.
And my very first contact is Richie, and he did help me a lot with all my questions. I hope he didn't get tired of my long questions.
Well, that's good. And you know, I tell the technicians, don't worry about making mistakes. That's what amateur radio is supposed to be, experimenting and learning. And after all, Reggie Jackson struck out 2,600 times in his career. The honest, unintentional mistakes will never get you in trouble. It's the conduct, the bad conduct, that will get you in trouble. In fact, I guarantee you, this is a pretty big group tonight, but I guarantee you there's not an extra class in this group that hasn't called CQ on a dummy load before and wondering why they didn't get an answer, or tried to check into a 40-meter net with a 20-meter beam, as I did the other night. Or maybe turned on the rig one night and wondered what was wrong with the audio and realized you still had the headphones plugged in from the night before. Those mistakes, we're supposed to make mistakes to experiment, and that's how we learn. And you know, Thomas Edison had 1,000 failed experiments, but the 1,001 first experiment worked. And that's just what we're supposed to do. So I don't have any trouble with generally have no trouble with the technicians. When they make mistakes, they make mistakes and they correct them.
Riley, I have a question. Let's say, you know, the question is about the physical address and, you know, where you set up your station. Let's say you have two physical addresses. One is primary and one is secondary. If you set up, I know the license says where your address is, where your primary address. If you set up stations on two different addresses, do you get into trouble?
Well, all the FCC requires is that you have a valid mailing address, valid U.S. mailing address on your license. So wherever you want to get the mail, that's what you can use as your address, but you're responsible for any mail that the FCC sends you to that address. So you wouldn't list two addresses, you would just pick one that's going to be your primary address. That's all they require.
Yeah. So the station should be where the mailing address is.
It doesn't have to be. With everything, so many things being mobile now and people themselves being so mobile, all the FCC requires is that you have a valid mailing address.
Okay, so I understand.
Yeah, you don't have to have your station there.
So it could be mobile.
Well, a lot of the foreign licensees, they claim anyway that they have a valid US mailing address and they get the license that way. So it's not linked to your station location anymore like it used to be, because if they're going to find you, they're going to find you by direction finding anyway.
Okay. I understand. Thank you for your insight and
Thanks,
thank you for the
and
answer.
Good luck. Congratulations on getting into amateur radio.
You're welcome.
Very good. Lloyd, you're next.
And thank you, Riley, for your service to our nation. And thank you for your continued service to the amateur radio hobby.
Thank you.
My question involves pecuniary interest. I sent you an email last week or so. I'm all about the hobby being useful, cutting edge, playing around, seeing what we can do. But the article I sent you involved Bitcoin. And there was a couple of hams that managed to proof of concept exchange Bitcoin over 40 meters. And that's a kind of a fun thing to think about, but doesn't that violate 97113?
Probably. I remember that email. I'm dealing with it now, talking to the league about it. I'll get you an answer.
Okay, and thank you again for your service.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll get you an answer on it.
Anyone else?
Richie?
Richie, go ahead, Richie.
Yeah, so Riley, about 2 years ago, we had a serious situation on our repeaters. It was tremendous interference, cost us a lot of members, a lot of anger, et cetera. And many phone calls to Laura Smith and Dan Henderson up at the league. And it finally got the point across to me, which was when it comes to enforcement, it's almost a triage. Amateur radio, we get frustrated. We can't get on the radio and we get angry. But compare that to the jamming that was going on to public service, where ambulances were being jammed and police and fire, et cetera. And in these particular times, the fact that there is a lookout for terrorists and the use of the radio waves for terrorism. And they explained that to me. And what they said was, we have it marked down. When our field engineer is in an area, because again, another learning experience, I could report from now until the cows come in certain actions, but it wouldn't be legal. It had to be the FCC field engineer who was actually there and heard it and documented it. And they said, when we have an engineer somewhere in the area, we will do what we can to take into account your problem. And that's exactly what happened. They were doing something else, but he took the time, went into the area where the offender was, spent a good part of the day, actually had packed up and was ready to leave when the offender came on. He immediately set up again, got his tape recordings, and it resulted in a fine of some $25,000 to the individual. But my point being, and again, because you were in the enforcement end, it's important to understand, yes, it's frustrating to us, but we're in a pecking order and we're not at the top.
Yeah, and public safety and safety of life and so forth, interference to medical systems and so forth will always take higher priority. That's a sad fact. And in the days where we had a lot of FCC agents, they could get to it faster. A lot of them were amateurs. So it's a little different now. And that's one reason that the FCC wanted to set up a program such as the Volunteer Monitor Program, so we could be an adjunct or a force multiplier for them.
John is asking, last year there was talk about giving technicians voice privileges on several bands. Is that dead? I
don't know the status of that. The wonderful thing about running a VM program is I get to keep my head down and not get into policy issues and bandwidth and things like that. I honestly don't know the status of that right now. It was kicked around a little bit, And a lot of people were for it. A lot of people were against it. You know, the technician license was never intended to be an entry-level license like the novice license was.
Right.
So we've got to do whatever's necessary to have a good, healthy flow of young people, new people into the hobby. And that was the underpinning of that idea. But I honestly don't know the status of it right now. I just keep rowing to shore, and I look up occasionally to make sure there's no rocks, and I just keep rowing just in the VM program.
Right. Jim piped in there. It's not dead yet. If you wanted to say anything else, Jim.
Well, all I know is that the league is still working on it. They're still working with the FCC on it. I just read something today that I think they're going to committee again with it. I really don't know. If they get something, if the text gets something, it's will be a very small portion, and I think there'll definitely be power limitations, and it'll be a very small portion of certain bands. And that's what the understanding that I had with it at this point, Gary.
Yeah, I don't see any enforcement threat from doing something like that.
Yeah.
My main concern is that we have a good, steady influx of young people into the hobby, because our demographics don't look good.
It's true. A lot of it, you know, they're trying to open up the digital end of the spectrum. They're putting a couple of digital spots in there because the younger people today like the digital end better. And that's where they want to play. It's instantaneous gratification for them. And that's what they're looking for. As like I said before, the league has got a couple of kits building for them, and it's really, that's what they want to do. The youngsters want to build, and they want to get involved in the digital end of it. So we have to embrace that. So,
and you know, I remember in the old days, I remember the AMers complaining about sideband, saying it was going to ruin the hobby. What kind of system is that? It doesn't even have a carrier, and it sounds like a duck. It's going to be the end of amateur radio. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I certainly do. I've been licensed since 1959. I remember that very well.
And I'm sure even earlier than that, when everything was all key, all code, when they probably thought voice would ruin amateur radio too.
Sure. But you know, we got to move with the times, and we got to improve. We got to, we really have to work with technology that's out there, and we have to embrace it, really. We have to embrace some of the young people and what they want to do. You know, it's always nice to be an elbow, but I said, no, we can't go out there and tell them, well, this is the way you should do it. I said, yeah, that's okay if you have a couple of technical things with like the antennas or this, that, and the other thing. When you're telling them, you know, this is what I want to learn. If you don't want to work with them on that, they're not going to want to talk to you. As we all know that this is the big thing. Okay, this is a radio too. It's a cell phone. This is a radio.
Sad but
without
true.
RF, it's the same thing. But we want to show them what the real radio is.
Well, yeah, and we can't just sell it on we can talk around the world anymore, because of WhatsApp and texting. They probably have friends around the world.
Exactly.
So it's got to be a different approach. I'm too old to figure out what it is, but it's got to be out there somewhere.
Yeah, me too. I'm up there with you, Riley, somewhere. So, you know.
Well, once you've acquired the equipment, it's free to talk around the world. No data plan, no phone bill every month.
Yeah, of course. And you don't know, you make new friends all the time. You're not talking to the same person. You don't know who you're talking to. You call out a CQ, you don't know who you're going to come.
Yeah, and you can experiment. You can experiment with your antennas and build this and that. And you can't experiment too much with a cellular phone.
You make a lot of new friends.
Yeah.
Make a lot of new friends. So, all right, that's all I'll say. I'm going to mute right now, Rich.
Okay.
Really, again, Riley, thanks so much for a great presentation.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it.
Gary, is there anyone else with a hand up?
Nobody with a hand up and nobody with a hand out.
Well, thank you, folks. And we probably should do this over the next year a couple of times, because I'm hoping there will be a lot of developments and a lot of accomplishments this coming year, because I feel like we're rolling. This program was much harder to set up than I expected, but it's running a lot better than I expected. So I'm hoping we can gain some good ground, have some good cases with the FCC this year, and make a difference.
Well, I'll keep that in mind and maybe reach out to you again near the end of the year.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation, and I'm sure that everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you. And I want to remind you that if you think of a question or you weren't able to get the question in, my email address is my call sign, K4ZDH, at ARRL.net. And I guarantee you I will answer within a couple of days.
Thank you very much,
Thanks
Riley.
again.
Thank you. Hope to see you again soon. Thanks. Thank you.
Take care now.